Good afternoon, everybody. My greetings from the Jalbagh community to all of you. At Prem Sutram Vyakhyāsyāma Satchidananda Sarupam Chaitanyam. This is an aphorism of love quoted by the third revered leader of Radhaswami faith, Param Guru Maharaj Sahib. Param Satchit Premananda Prakash Shabd Anhad Nath Sarupam Radha Swami Dhanyatmak Shabd Dhun Adi Anadi Chaitanyam Radha Swami Sarv Karnam Atvikhyatam Mool Param Tattvam Bhaje. The English translation is given underneath, and you'll be able to see its meaning. I believe that this is a codification of the ultimate phenomenology of consciousness in the spiritual sense. Another significant event that I wish to draw your attention to in connection with the subject matter of my talk is founding of the Radhaswami faith on the Basant Panchami day in January 1861, a little more than 152 years ago. This was manifestation of the Supreme Being, Almighty Lord Radhaswami, in the form of the Sant Sadguru, that is, saint, true preceptor or adept, for the redemption of jivas, that is, living beings. Mark that it includes all living beings, not just humans. I only quote the first paragraph as translated from this proclamation. It is hereby proclaimed for the benefit of adhikaris, that is, those fit and willing, that the Supreme Being, Almighty Lord Radhaswami, on observing the jivas, living beings, undergoing extreme suffering and being subjected to delusion of matter and mind, has himself assumed the form of the saint, true guru or preceptor, and manifested on this earth for their redemption, and through his supreme grace explains the secret of his original abode and teaches the method of attaining that abode by means of the Surat Shabd Marg, the path which unites Surat, that is spirit or Atman, with the Shabda, that is spiritual sound. Yesterday, Dr. Haglin spoke about the spiritual sound as one of the fundamental entities. It behoves the jivas, that is living beings, that they should engender within themselves love and faith in his holy feet. Remember that this is all that is being asked for in return. So it is really a faith which rests on love, and that is why we refer to its ultimate phenomenology as aphorisms of love. There is a second and third operative part of this proclamation, which I don't wish to burden you with. Those interested could certainly look up souvenir of the Radhaswami Satsang brought out at its centenary celebration in 1961. Personally, my first public discourse dwelling upon the subject matter of integrating phenomenology with the epistemology of natural sciences can be traced back to the paper quoted here on reality and truth vis-a-vis wisdom via apara vidya, that is natural sciences, and para vidya, that is phenomenology, experiential science. Over the years, it has developed into an omni-quantum theory for spiritual consciousness, system modeling in cosmology. And the reference is given here. It's also part of the SPIRCon proceedings, which is due for release later this afternoon. Since Professor Barrell has already presented his monumental work along with Dr. Price on the subject matter of integrating inner experience with neuroscience or scientific methodology, and you have heard it from horse's mouth, I would only like to say that we have been greatly influenced by their approach on inner experience and neuroscience, which I happened to see recently in November 2012, when I said earlier this month, that's when I wrote this. That is November 2012. So I would skip what's from the book because you have listened directly to Professor Barrell already on the subject. This is also familiar stuff. So there are many aspects in which we agree. So let me hasten to point out that there are some distinguishing features of our approach. There are a couple of vantage points from which we work on consciousness studies. And one of these is Radhaswami faith, phenomenology of Radhaswami faith. And the second is systems approach, which I have been trained as a professional to adopt all through my working career. And this is the title of a paper which I have already referred as being part of my talk at the spiritual conclave that was held in November 2011. 2010 or 2011? This is also from Price and Barrell, so this is one of the examples of the power law holding true in a number of situations. They have a couple of very interesting examples, and I refer to second pain and associative thinking as particularly interesting aspects dealt with by them. All this is part of the book. However, there's a quote from Dalai Lama which we could interestingly recall. Certainly physics designed the bombs, biology the germ warfare, chemistry the nerve gas, and so on. But it will be the unhealthy emotions of individuals that will trigger these horrors. These emotions can only be controlled, reshaped, and rechanneled by technologies developed from successful inner science. So it is important to integrate inner experience with scientific investigations and develop what one might call inner science or experiential science or phenomenological science. I've already referred to the twin vantage points on which we speak. Let me refer to some other unique features of our model. I believe that Professor Rocco J. Gennaro is also here in the audience. And last year, he published a book on the consciousness paradox, wherein he dealt with his hot brain thesis, hot standing for higher order thoughts. He maintains that what makes a mental state conscious is that a suitable higher order thought is directed at that mental state. Drawing upon this inspiration of his hot brain theory, I've proposed hot consciousness scan correlates, where hot consciousness stands not for higher order thought but hierarchical order theory of consciousness, which together with my co-author, Dr. Vishal Sani, was presented at TSC 2012 last year at Tucson by my colleague, as I had stayed back here and participated in the conference in its Eastern philosophy panel discussions. And the scan correlates stand for spiritual, cognitive, and neural environmental correlates. In response to one of the questions posed to Dr. Barrell at the end of his talk, I would only like to mention that determinism or classicality and other issues are related with model building. And there's nothing which prevents you from building a model of brain which is quantum theoretic. So also a model of mind which is quantum theoretic. And then if you take the correlates, it would be unjustified to call them as a reductionist in approach. So it's a question of how we look at the model, which simulates the reality. Nobody knows for sure whether brain is a quantum mechanics gadget or whatever, but it can certainly be modeled to our advantage through a quantum theoretic model. And once you do that, one could not accuse the modelers at least of reductionism. So it's a matter of approach. And for the moment, we could take this as the view that instead of trying to settle the score whether the Penrose-Hamroff approach or whether von Neumann-Stapp approach or some other approach is the right one to handle the paradox, consciousness paradox, which Professor Gennaro refers to. But each has its own way of generating a solution for it. And in the absence of any conclusive evidence to nail down the truth, one could continue with all these coexisting models as being true, depending on one's preference. This is the model that we have, and I've put it up a number of times earlier too, but it becomes important to emphasize that you need to know where you are headed for. Your goals have to be clear. Just building hypotheses in dark, as Price and Barrel recommend, with due respect to them, I must say, is groping in the dark. And if you are clear about the phenomenology, why should you grope in the dark? You could build a model for yourself, and keeping that model in mind, you could frame hypotheses and test them. Test them certainly. If your model fails on the acid test of hypothesis, then you have to reshape the model. But so long as it stands to acid test of hypotheses, it survives. So that's the approach you take. And this gives us much more speed in preparing hypotheses. So we need to know what our conception of reality is like based on the phenomenology. So spiritual phenomenology is the center stage in our scheme of things. And according to this, on the left side, I have the macrocosmic model of the universe. On the right-hand side, I have the human microcosm. And it turns out that according to Eastern philosophy, the human microcosm is a perfect analog of the macrocosm. And that's why also it is justified to turn inward as a human being and learn a lot more about macrocosm than is likely to be known by outer researchers through the scientific approach. Because no matter how much you try, you are going to be bound by physical reality. You are not going to get beyond physics. You are not going to get into the domain of universal mind or the domain of universal spirit even beyond that. So the macrocosmic model that I have in mind has these three grand divisions of creation. It has the largest domain of universal spirit, whose source or origin is the Lord God of all universe, which is one entity. We know this entity by the name of Radhasan. There may be other beliefs. And as our model shows, there is not just one center of consciousness, but in our model building, we have imagined that there are 21 such centers of consciousness, stages of consciousness, through which one can progress, 7 each belonging to the 3 large divisions of the macrocosm. namely the region of universal spirit, region of universal mind, and region of universal matter or physical universe. Scientists are by and large confined to the physical universe. Psychologists and others get into the domain of region of universal mind also. But there are no so-called scientists looking at the outer world who have made any worthwhile contributions to region of universal spirit. So it has required the phenomenologists who have turned inwards to disseminate this knowledge about the region of universal spirit, which is beyond the region of Upanishads also. Upanishads describe the region of universal matter and universal mind, but stop at the level of Par-Brahman, beyond the three Brahmans. They do suggest that there is existence or creation beyond this, but they don't describe it. So it is this region with the so-called religion of saints addresses. And it is a region of pure spiritual phenomena. It is not subjected to any change. It is eternal. There is no question of birth and rebirth or cycle of birth and death, which at least the Eastern philosophy holds, plagues both the other regions. The region of universal mind suffers from it much more than the region of universal matter suffers much more from this change than the region of universal mind. But universal mind also in the so-called Mahapralaya, greater dissolution, would be destroyed and new universal mind regions will come up. So there's a whole philosophy behind it. There are believed to be 84 subtle attention currents which are responsible for this cycle of birth and death in the two lower regions of universal mind and universal matter. And these are made up of the three gunas of qualities and 5 tattvas or elements. The combinations lead to these 84 subtle currents, and that gives rise to the cycle of birth and death, cycle of change. But since the region of pure spirits, devoid of mind and body, is not subject to any of such changes. It is eternal, and that is the largest region and houses the largest number of entities. This is another part of the model inspired by systems approach to make use of not only the model schematic based on certain fundamental axiom and fundamental postulates on component modeling and interconnection of the components in the system. But this gives rise to the method of solving these various quantitative relationships, or at least qualitative relationships, quantified in a fuzzy sense, if not numerically. So, in this particular case, since we use quantum model, this classical approach is applicable because on observation, all quantum phenomena reduce to classical state, and therefore it becomes a classical solution. Once you have taken observation and you wish to verify your observations, then it's only the classical model which would come to the fore. Aphorism to the tune that yatha sachkhande tatha brahmande, yatha brahmande tatha pinde, and yatha samashti srishti tatha vishishti srishti. That is, it all says that as in pure spiritual region, so also in region of universal mind. As in universal region of universal mind, so also in the region of universal matter. And as in macrocosm, so also in human microcosm. So that's what the scriptures say. And these are all reflections of what takes place in the region of pure spiritual activity. So that is the real model which the rest of the creation follows in its image. We have visualized what we call resonance-operated switches in our schematic. I'll get back to it. Here, you notice here that in this model presentation, we have potential sources and we have quantum force field, or in the earlier model there used to be classical force field, but since the advent of quantum mechanics, we define it to be a quantum force field. And lately we now find, as you also heard from Professor Havlin yesterday, that the basic quantum theory model would not do. There is no duality in the region of pure spirits, devoid of mind and body, because the duality is between mind and body, or spirit and mind, and that's in the last two super regions, but not in the first one, which is pure spirits. So we have modified and suggested it to be the omni-quantum spiritual force field, which has the requisite duality in the other two regions, but has no uncertainty in the top region of the pure spirits. And there, the duality is there, but it is at will. It is not a duality to which one is subjected because of uncertainty. You choose to stand apart from the creator or the source. As a devotee worshipping the Lord, you could do so in the region of pure spirit. But if you remain merged with Him and be the creator yourself, that choice of unity is of course there. So it is duality at will, and therefore, because of want of any terminology, I have referred to it as omni-quantum spiritual force field, saying that God does not play dice. He plays straight bat and ball games, and therefore there is no duality. There's complete certainty in what he does. But anyway, to carry conviction with the scientists, the approach suggested by Price and Barrett is fine indeed. Let me just use one other aspect. This model has been justified at Tucson at TSC 2012 by making use of analytical hierarchy process of the operations research methodology, and it can also be derived as suggested here on the right-hand side, as also pointed out in my presentation to the Eastern Philosophy Forum at TSC 2012 by making use of the contextual relationship, and therefore it has been doubly integrated with scientific methodologies through consensus-building approaches, which Professor Barrell spoke of. So you need to build consensus about these relationships which you obtain. So we have a group of participants who are knowledgeable with that kind of phenomenology. And then through consensus, we have come up with this model structure. I also refer to one other person who might be in the audience, Dr. Chris Fields. His recent paper published in the Journal of General Systems shows logically that observer-independent, environmentally induced superselection is a myth and does not produce classicality as believed by some, that if it's, they suggest observer-independent, environment-induced superselection process, ion selection, in producing the measurement paradox in quantum theoretic models. But Dr. Fields shows conclusively that there is no such model feasible. So there are several groups working in psychophysical dynamics, as mentioned by Professor Barrett. But I think ours is among the few who work on spiritual psychophysical dynamics. That is, we believe that the observer is the spirit, not the mind. And the observed system is the one which contains both the material world as well as the psychological world or cognitive world. So both mind and body are modeled through quantum mechanics or quantum field theory. And then we consider the agreement with the spiritual phenomenology. So that is why we consider this as spiritual psychophysical dynamics. The observer is the spirit only, and he is separated from the observed system, which is the rest of the universe. So it's observer's phenomenology which matters. So he gives his inner experience, and that is to be interpreted and tested through hypothesis building in the light of the model which you have in mind, which I believe ought to be there, because otherwise you are not getting anywhere. So much against what science would seem to dictate by way of keeping things open. I think even science and the Western society insist on having goals. So your goals must be well defined. Otherwise, how ever would you reach your goals if you don't know where you want to get at? So you must know where you're going and how you will get there. And this is what distinguishes precisely the Radha-Swami faith. The proclamation that I brought to your notice right from day one suggested what are these various consciousness centers and how can you get to each one of them, and even the highest one. Precisely, it gives you the methodology and calls it as Surat Shabd Yog, the path of uniting the spirit with the sound current. So ultimately, we recognize not the 36 attention currents, but just the 2 pure spiritual currents. Those are also merging into one, but the one which is going outward or downward, whichever way you wish to refer to it, is known as the spirit current. And on its return path, it's known as sound current, which is attracted towards its source, back to its source. So that is how the circuit is completed. So these are the only 2 currents, but in fact they are one and the same current integrated together. At the beginning of creation, they started as 2 currents, one outward flowing, and then before it returned, it was a separate current. But once they united, they become one integral current known as Radha-Swami. In our scriptures, Radha is the one which characterizes the first great spiritual current which flowed out of the source of consciousness. And Swami is the one who was the repository of all consciousness. This also raises certain issues that need to be looked into. And this leads to a certain comment from my side regarding the work of Professors Price and Barrell, which is great, but still the emphasis on now and the present is far too much. I believe that there is a cumulative consciousness. Consciousness is not just the present entity. Consciousness is a cumulative subject, and you bear the tag of that cumulative consciousness in you. It's not all the time that you are in communion with that highest consciousness, but that is the one which you have achieved, and that is the one which characterizes your frequency, or characteristic frequency, or natural frequency, if I may say so. The resonant, dominant resonant frequency which you generate as a spirit source is the cumulative effect of consciousness. In fact, if our supposition is correct that initially all these spirits were with the Lord God Almighty, then the spirit shorn of its mind and body is one and the same as Lord's spirit, and therefore it has the highest consciousness of the Supreme Being. But it's because of being alloyed with the covers of mind and body that it's not able to exhibit the dominance of resonance at that original frequency. It shows lower frequency. The Spanda Shastra in the Kashmir Shaivism and the string theory which Professor Hadlin spoke of, all refer to these individual strings with their characteristic frequencies, but I think they need a modification. As I said, that ultimately the frequency is one and the same for all the spirit forces as that of its creator. Once they get shorn of the body and mind, the frequency will elevate itself to the highest consciousness level. So given that it's the cumulative consciousness which counts, not the current consciousness or present consciousness. So my phenomenology will collect information cumulatively as of the present through questions of the kind raised by Professor Barrell or recommended by Price and Barrell together. So while I do emphasize phenomenology, I do emphasize phenomenology as of presence, but it has to be a cumulative one as of present. Perhaps in Western world you don't believe in rebirth and things like this, so that's one reason why present is all that matters. But cumulatively one is elevating one's consciousness through the various cycles of birth and death one is undergoing. And it is when one succeeds in reaching the highest consciousness that one merges with the ultimate source, and there is no further cycle of birth and death that one undergoes. So that is the eternal consciousness condition. But everybody is rising to that potential level. But it might take time to reach that full potential. So one needs a model to have this kind of conviction and then verify it. There's nothing in our model building and experimentation, which we have also done extensively, which suggests anything to the contrary. And I would give you some examples of the measurements that we have taken using the latest equipment for sensitive measurements of magnetic field. And this is magnetoencephalogram that we propose rather than EEG, because here it tends to be something which does not disturb the meditationist. The helmet doesn't have to sit on the head of the subject. Helmet for taking neural signature in MEG could be a little away from the head, close to the head. Many sensors would pick up the signals. So this is the reason why I have just neuro correlates, but neuro-environmental correlates. If you pick up the magnetic field or electromagnetic field or electric field in the brain or its environment, nearby environment, there would not be much difference. You would get the same results. This we have verified through a number of experimentations. However, we believe that the techniques ought to be non-invasive type, non-intrusive type, and they should not disturb the meditationist in the least, so that he reaches his true potential. This is not done. The reason is that as you rightly point out, Price and Barrell, that the subject on which these tests are conducted are different from the investigators themselves. So you make them co-investigators, which is the right approach. You consult them, you take the phenomenology from them, and then, of course, you use methods which are acceptable in science to test the various hypotheses which you build through consensus. And if proved right, then you have evidence for further hypothesis testing and model building. But I pointed out a few points where we differ in our approach. And as of now, we have not found anything to discard our approach in favor of some other. So while we continue to imbibe the richness of thoughts and work that we see in the years, we hold our ground so long that it's not disproved. So long as our model does not fall, then it fails, then we'll modify it. So that's the gist of what I want to say. I'll show you some of the recent experiments that we have taken. On the middle column, we have these various alternative centers of consciousness to be attained or achieved as higher and higher stages of consciousness. In fact, the highest stage is at the bottom, so it is directed from top downwards the way it is listed. We are not referring to consciousness of the material region. We have not taken it as part of the Surat Shabd Yoga Abhyas. That is the sound practice that we recommend. That starts with the lower level of Brahman, not even the lower level, the Brahma part, the first Brahman part. Niranjan is the first Brahman, Om is the second Brahman, Rarang is the third Brahman, and then there is the Parabrahman, and then beyond is the Satpurush, Soham Purush, Satpurush, and Radhaswami. In between there are a few other stages, but these are the important landmarks to highlight. And so these are the alternatives to be achieved. And these are the necessary and sufficient conditions or factors. And it was through analytical hierarchy process, through consensus building among a group of participants that we found this hierarchization of the consciousness levels in the large cosmos and also the human cosmos. All these are mere simulations Those are similar sounds. Beyond this, there is no appropriate musical instrument with which they can be identified. So in Radhaswami region, the instruments are indescribable. The only way we know is that this mystic name resounds, and also that this stage follows after going through the earlier stage of listening to snake charmer's lute and other things in succession. And it's a sort of very highly spiritual, melodious orchestra that plays there. But there's no instrument in the world with which it matches. So I can't name it or simulate it and reproduce it. Yeah. But the others are very well reproduced and are close. So up to snake charmer's lute, there's no problem. There are people who ask at various stages whether it is veena, the stringed instrument which plays here, or it's the snake charmer's lute. It is most definitely the snake charmer's lute. Veena plays at Sunna, where the third Brahman obtains. So Veena is of a lower order of consciousness. So this is one aspect. Let me now forge further ahead and see if I can give you quickly. Now over the years we have refined our experimental procedures. We had started with very simple circuits, tuned circuits, the filter circuits, but then we did not have elaborate procedures for shielding noise. We did not have very highly sensitive instrumentation. So we moved further, and we now make use of SQUID, that is superconducting quantum interference device, which is a highly sensitive magnetometer, and we use the adequately shielded enclosures so that the noise, magnetic noise in particular, does not disturb the proceedings inside. We went to Indira Gandhi's Center for Atomic Research at Kalpakkam, since at that time we did not have our own facility of SQUID in a properly shielded chamber. And we conducted these experiments there on individual meditationists as well as group meditation sessions in their chambers which were adequately shielded. And some of these results and our earlier results with crude devices had all shown that some of the frequencies of interest were 4.5 hertz, 76 hertz, 108 hertz, and 126 hertz. These repeatedly had shown up, frequencies at which resonance took place. So now we have our own facilities of magnetoencephalography, and we should be able to speed up our experiments considerably. Now let me show some phenomenology. This is the 40 channel or so helmet which IG car Kalpakkam had, and these channels which are highlighted in yellow pick up the parietal lobe signals primarily, and those were of interest, and those do match what we got from those signal streams. Well, we also use some consciousness psychological tests in the context of the popular yoga and meditation session practices. So we have 3 sets of subjects, those who were pre-initiates, those who were first initiates, those who were second initiates and were undergoing these yoga classes to see how their consciousness after undergoing classes behaved. So we have these results and various colleagues have presented this at concurrent sessions, so I'm not taking time to present these. Dr. Sona Vijay Khurana has presented. There are others, and then MBTI tests have also been presented here. I'd only make a point here that the authors of this test seem to be worried that the intuition level was going down after going through the classes on meditation and yoga. But this was counterintuitive. But unfortunately, they didn't see that while this is not a significant result at 5% level of confidence or 1% level of confidence, it's at a lower level of confidence that it could be going down. So one need not get too much worried. One needs to repeat such tests and see what's really the reason. So they were worried that it's fine that extroversion reduces, introversion increases, but why is intuition tending to decrease? But intuition is tending to decrease as a result which is supported at a much lower level of confidence than the usual 5% level which is taken as acceptable. So it's not so. So these are all taken from the work of these people. We have also done work on exceptional experiences and near-death experiences questionnaire, etc., but not very extensive ones. But this is what we are ourselves interested in. And since our focus is cumulative consciousness as of now, so we ask these kinds of questions which are mentioned here. So it's not just the present experience, but also the past experience. Then we have taken these kinds of measurements. I'll illustrate some. We have an oath of secrecy in our faith that we do not share experiences, but the mentor or adept is exempt from this oath. And people confide in him, as they do in any religion. They confide, they confess. So that is, without disclosing the exact identity, something which can be shared for scientific purposes. So that's what I have begun to do. So as a mentor, I have that privilege, so I have given them code numbers, so I'm not disclosing the identity. But as an adept or preceptor myself, I have the privilege to document my own experiences for the benefit of the rest of the community. So I give my own experience also, first of all, as spiritual phenomenology. So although I bear code name O, but then I declare that it's my phenomenology. Now this is something which is, I've not found documented, but I have experienced it, and experienced it from day one of my being elevated as the adept on succeeding from the last adept about a decade back. And when I rose to acknowledge the acclamation or consensus, then I felt this surge of massive flow of inner consciousness current, if you will, which flooded me with all intuition. I wasn't at a loss to say what I wanted to. So this is the kind of support you get. So that's what is meant by having this hotline with an elevated level of consciousness, that you are always in communion with that level. And when you need support, you get consciousness of that level immediately to answer your own questions. So before that, I might have no clue to what's being asked of me. But when the question is posed, I should be able to answer from the knowledge or consciousness available with the level from which my presiding deity comes. So that's the belief. So that experience I had, and this is commonplace. The first initiates do get the refulgent picture of their mentor or adept when they perform meditation. This word resounds, that is the original mystic word, and that would take you through all these stages. All the stages that I had mentioned in the sound clip and brought to you as simulation I have undergone, and I can verify those stages. But once I cross those stages and reach a highest stage, I directly hear that stage. I don't have to pass through the intermediate stage. So it takes only a moment to make line hot with my source of consciousness. It doesn't take too long. So all these sounds one goes through if one had not heard them earlier, and then one is endowed with this status of wearing the mantle of the successor, then one must have that consciousness. So that consciousness is given to you. It's not earned by you, it's given to you. So that's it. Then there are correlates of this. I'll show some. This is one of the correlates of MEG. There are two resonance points at 126 hertz and 108 hertz. 108 hertz is at a lower decibel level, and 126 hertz is the dominant one. So my natural frequency now is 126 hertz, not 108 hertz. And through evidences of this kind, we have reasons to believe. This is another similar plot where there is a single resonant frequency, which is 126 hertz. This shows both again, but 126 is higher than 108. And then there are others whose data we are taking. These are the phases of group activity. And here also it works. And as a group also, we can measure the consciousness of the entire meditation group. This also somewhat unique exercise to our group. Group meditation sessions are not so common and not monitored through EEG or MEG exercises, but we have begun to do it. So let me leave it at that. There are others, codename V. There are two frequencies. What it means is that this is the dominant one which has been attained. This is the one which the person is striving to reach, hasn't quite made it, but it appears. But it's not the dominant resonant frequency yet. So the dominant resonant frequency is 76 hertz, a high level of attainment, but there's further consciousness level which is possible. These are tentative hypotheses. These need to be tested thoroughly and then asserted. So this is the record of some other phenomenology excerpt. This is somebody having the resonant frequency at 4.5 hertz, which is the first one where you hear bell and conch sound. So we are able to make such correlations and so on. So I'll stop here. But this is the kind of research that we are supporting. This is the spiritual phenomenology, which we record, and its neural correlate in the form of MEG data. And then we try to make sense out of it through the integration techniques that we support. Okay, thank you very much.